Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Hannah Fuzzy, and I am a programming librarian here at Cary Memorial Library. First, I'd like to thank the Cary Library Foundation. Their support allows us to run incredible programs like the one we will be having tonight. This program is being recorded and will be posted to the library's YouTube channel. If you have any questions for our speaker, please enter them into the Q&A, and we will have time at the end to go over them. And now I'd like to introduce our guest. Natasha Seaman is a professor at Rhode Island College. She teaches art history with a specialization in 17th century Dutch painting and artists. She is also the author of a forthcoming book at Hendrick to Brugghen, published by Lund Humphries and their Northern Light series, and contributes to Hyperallergic, an online art magazine. Now I will turn Zoom over to Natasha.
Hey, so thank you so much, Hannah. Um, and I'm delighted to be here with you tonight to discuss some of the many interesting artists who were women in the 17th century in the Dutch Republic. And I'm going to share my screen with you, which will take longer than average because of the longer than average age of my computer. Okay, here we are. All right. So before I get started talking about particularly the women in painters in the Netherlands in the 17th century, I need to explain a little bit about the Dutch Republic, how it came to pass, and what were its special characteristics. So the area that we are talking about is here. This is what ultimately becomes the Dutch Republic. It's also called the United Provinces of the Netherlands. And it's now colloquially known as Holland. And it is just north of Belgium now, but this was then known as Flanders. But originally, this was all one region known as the Netherlands or the Lowlands, and they all spoke basically the same language as they do today, indeed. But okay, so this region had been for centuries part of other larger entities, other political entities, whether it was part of the Holy Roman Empire or part of the Duchy of Burgundy that is in France. But they had always maintained a fair amount of independence from those outside forces. They had paid taxes to them, but they had had control over their individual cities. And the countries had a high level of merchant activity, artists, craftsmen, and they produced many high quality products like tapestries and metalwork. And so that it made it a fairly comfortable, pleasant, high degree of comfort area of the world. In the beginning of the 16th century, things changed for the Netherlands somewhat because it was inherited by this guy here on the right, Titian's or Charles V, depicted here by Titian. And he was just ended up inheriting just vast quantities of Europe, which included the Netherlands, but also Spain, big chunks of Germany. And because Spain had its overseas empires as well, he had control over the New World. And ultimately, he found this to be rather a bit much. And he abdicated his rule in favor of his son, Philip II. And he divided up his empire. He gave some of it to his brother and he gave some of it to his son. Philip II then ended up with control over the Netherlands and over Spain, and he pretty much ruled this from Spain. And he was a particularly vigorous pursuer of taxes. So he raised the taxes on the Dutch and the Flemish, these two different parts of the Netherlands. He also was very concerned about the state of religion in Europe during this time period, which was dominated by the Reformation, in which the Catholic Church was being questioned and rejected by various Protestant reformers. And in particular, the reformer John Calvin was especially popular among the people of the Netherlands. They weren't really allowed access to his work, so his interest in him spread secretly. He was a follower of Martin Luther, but he took an even harder line on a lot of things compared to Martin Luther. One of the most significant of those being images and the depiction of images, and the use of images, excuse me, in churches. So in 1566, the concern over the higher taxes in the Netherlands, combined with a desire to follow the teachings of John Calvin, these two things came together and created the Dutch Revolt, or the revolt of the Netherlands. And it started with iconoclasm, which is the breaking of images, which was done both violently and non-violently throughout the Netherlands in 1566. So the Spanish, though they declared independence in the Netherlands, but the Spanish responded very forcefully to this, and the southern part of the Netherlands was subdued and brought back into the Spanish Empire, and that is roughly the area that is now Belgium. The northern part, by contrast, declared independence from Spain, and they became a affirmed political entity called the Dutch Republic, which was essentially a republic. They did not have a crowned head in charge of them. They did have somebody that sort of served as a figurehead, but generally the country was more or less run by relatively elected people. And Calvinism was the official religion. So some of the results of this were what I already said, that we have a new government with some democratic ideals. There was a new religion that rejected the use of religious images. Also, the people of in this battle against the Spanish, the Dutch then came to be at war with Flanders, and they blockaded the city of Antwerp. Antwerp had been one of the major destinations for trade, coming both from the Baltic area and from the south and from the New World. By blockading it, it meant that the ships that would have come into Antwerp had to come to the next nearest port, which was Amsterdam, which brought a huge amount of wealth to Amsterdam. The Dutch also were in competition with the Spanish for world trade, and everywhere the Spanish went, the Dutch were sure to go. So they were in Latin America, and the Dutch went there, and they were in East Asia, and the Dutch went there. And this was all facilitated by the founding of basically one of the first multinational corporations that we refer to by its Dutch initials, the VOC, but also we can call it the East India Trade Company, that essentially made the nation hugely rich and created a new bourgeois culture and merchant class that had, already been present in the Netherlands, but grew enormously in the 17th century. So what are the results of this change upon the art world? So one difference is that there was no longer the option to make commissions for churches of religious paintings or for individuals so much. Um, but uh, the Dutch really embraced this kind of simple Protestant identity, but they were also voracious consumers. And paintings turned out to be one of their favorite things to buy and to own. And and for good reason, because they were, on one hand, they were an item that you could show off your wealth with, but on the other hand, they depicted something. So they gave you an opportunity to show what you were interested in, something for you to look at. So paintings were sold on the open market, and there were a million paintings made during the 17th century by over 1,000 named artists, and many other artists that have gone unnamed in this time. And we can see that in this painting here by Anthony Palamedes that is depicting one of our simple Dutch families that is actually incredibly wealthy, which we can see from everyone wearing black clothing, which manages to simultaneously look very somber, but was incredibly expensive. And whoopsie, they also have wrong way. Okay. Sorry, I was going haywire. I touched my mouse wrong. There we go. Oh, wrong way entirely. There we are. But we can see that they also have a painting on their wall in the back, and that is just one painting. Some people had as many as 50 paintings in their houses, and some 200 paintings. So it was a hugely significant consumer item. So the one of the effects of the this huge new market was the development of specialization, which is a typical development within a large market, that producers start to specialize in particular products within the market to eliminate competition. And also buyers begin to buy in particular areas they find attractive, and those are called niche markets. And within the niche markets, we get, or what we can call the niche markets in the Dutch context, in the painting context, are different genres of paintings or kinds of paintings. And so what we're seeing here is a painting by Gerard David, who was a 16th century painter, as you can see. And he had the advantage, or whatever, his life was painting religious paintings, because that market existed for those back then. What we see in this later period then is all of these sort of different elements of the religious painting are kind of broken out into these different genres. So, for instance, where he includes a little still life with some flowers in the background, that becomes a whole independent genre of flower painting. A little scene of bread and apple and some milk gruel here becomes a breakfast still life. Same with a landscape in the background. And there's many other different genres and subgenres that were formed in this period. So women in the Dutch Republic had a lot more. Do I have a picture relating to this? Had a lot more freedom than other parts of the world. And unlike in Italy, for instance, where women could not own property, the Dutch women could own property. They also frequently continued to run businesses that their husbands had started when their husbands died, and they could own that business. And in fact, archival evidence is increasingly demonstrating that women were the primary purchasers of paintings in the 17th century. So there's room for this, as you can see, this huge number of paintings being made, the huge desire and demand for painting, this openness to women being in business. There's room here for female painters. Just to review a little bit of the history of female painters, we first start to get works that we know are by female painters in the medieval period. And I'm speaking here of the West. There may be things going on in the East that I am unaware of, and I just want to put that out there. Um, Nuns were frequent artists, or frequently the artists that we know about from this period. In fact, usually the artists that we know about from this period. Most famously, there's Hildegard of Bingen, who was a visionary and a mystic, and she often recorded her visions in drawings. But even ordinary nuns would often illuminate the books that they had that were for use by them. In the Renaissance period, it actually got a little bit more restrictive for women if you're looking at the context outside of convents. And of course, in the Dutch Republic, there were no convents because they had gotten rid of the whole Spanish, overt Spanish culture in the Dutch Republic. The guilds increasingly became more powerful, and they began to kind of exclude women overtly, and also created a system of training, sort of codified a system of training for artists that was included that an artist needed to have a lengthy apprenticeship that was held outside of their own house. They didn't live at home anymore. The students would go and live with their master. And generally, people started this training, children started this training around the age of 10. So you can imagine that it would be difficult to send a female child out of the house to go live somewhere else with a bunch of other young boys at a time when she is probably beginning to be groomed in preparation for marriage. So it was very difficult for many women to become artists because of that. And so the vast majority of female artists that we have from the Renaissance period were daughters of artists. And that's because they were able to train their daughters in their own home and without, risking that concern of them being outside of the house. So, and that is the case with Catharina van Hemissen, whose father was the painter whose name is escaping me right now, so I won't try to remember it. But here we can see her painting her self-portrait in one of the very earliest depictions of an artist of any gender painting their at the work of painting. So it's a particularly striking image for that. The pattern of artists being the children of female artists being the children of artists continues in the 17th century, although that was not the case with Judith Leister, who is the first of the female painters that we're going to look at today. She was from Haarlem, which is what the Harlem in New York City is named after, from the Dutch time of ownership of that part of the world. And it's a small town not far from Amsterdam, but it had a very vigorous art world there, particularly with Frans Hals as one of the main painters there. But we don't know with whom she trained. And actually, so as I said, her father was not a painter, but he was having financial difficulties. So she may have gone into the business of painting in order to sort of help support her family. And this is one of the a painting that she did to submit for permission to join the guild in Harlem, which she was allowed to do. It varied from city to city. Each city had their own version of the Painters Guild, which is sort of a combination between a social club and a union for different professions. And so Harlem was accepted her as a member of the guild, although we'll see later some of the other painters were not. And so this was submitted as her masterpiece, meaning she was she was demonstrating that she had the abilities to create an excellent painting, and she would have the status to go on to have students, which she didn't actually do, but it nonetheless gave her a new status there. And so here she is, just really engagingly looking out at the viewer and in the process of painting a typical painting for her. She often painted what were called genre scenes. So one of the genres was genre painting. And that depicts ordinary people usually just doing something ordinary in their lives. In this case, we have a young man playing a violin. She's painting in what she probably would never have painted in, which is this really elaborate white collar, which would have just imagined getting paint on very easily. But she's clearly presenting herself in the best possible light there in that masterpiece. She presented there, and it's interesting to see this again in contrast to Rubens's self-portrait, in which so Peter Paul Rubens, a great Flemish painter, who went on, he had like one of the most highly regarded careers in the history of art, and in his self-portrait he doesn't show himself painting. It was actually, for him, it was considered a bit of a character problem that he was so interested in painting, because his status was actually so high um, that painting was seen as a manual labor that he kind of lowered himself to do. By contrast, Judith Leister is pleased to show herself in the process of painting, because that's part of her significance, is that she has this identity as an unusual female painter. So this is another sort of typical painting by Leicester. Again, these genre paintings, just showing people going about their business. We generally don't know the outcome of these paintings. Um, Sometimes the story is fairly minor, as we see there. Sometimes it's a little bit more complicated, as we can see here in this painting called The Proposition, where we have a man in a fur cap who is offering a handful of coins to this young woman who is sewing. In the early years of looking at this painting, the interpretation was that this was a scene of prostitution, that she was for sale and he was offering money to her. But in the sort of next generation of scholarship on this, which coincided with second wave feminism in the mid 1970s, mid to late 1970s, people drew attention, or the scholar Freeman Fox Hofrichter in particular drew attention to the fact that this really doesn't look so much like a standard scene of prostitution, in which a woman looks much more like a prostitute. And and she felt like it was more likely a sort of unwanted come on from this man, and that Leicester, as a woman, understood this kind of undesired interruption into her work as from this man who is offering this handful of coins. But then new information emerged in which we learned that it was that the term to sew, as we can see her doing there, actually has a significance of meaning to have sex. And also the foot warmer at the base, did it again, at the base of her, at under her feet there, is a another symbol that often suggests sort of female readiness for sexual intercourse. And so now it seems like the subject kind of goes back to prostitution. But then another possibility also exists that it is simply this he could be making an offer of marriage. The convention of offering a ring was not standard at this point, and he may just be simply showing off the wealth that he has that she might be interested in um, having as his wife. So I without sort of pinning it down to either prostitution or a proposition, I think one thing that is striking about it as a female painter that she is definitely bringing a new complexity to the subject matter that we're seeing here. So perhaps because so many of the buyers of these paintings were women, the depiction of the female world inside the house was a really popular subject for Dutch painters. A lot of these images offered something to the male painter to the male viewer as well, as we can see in this painting by Gerrit Douw, A Maid at a Window, in which we have this young, attractive maid with a attractive décolletage at the opening to the window. And in the distance, we can see a mother and a child engaged in housework. So we sort of simultaneously have this enjoyable scene in the front and then a very virtuous mother in the background. Women in the Dutch Republic were viewed as having a particularly important role as embodiments of the national virtue of the country. The women kept the house clean. They were saved money. They didn't, and they and they were virtuous. So and they were cared personally for their children rather than having nannies and the like. And so this is a fairly typical image by a male painter. We saw that Judith Leister takes sort of a different approach to the subject, so the standard subject. What do women do with genre scenes like this one? Women at work in the house. And we can see that with this, the work of this artist, Gertruydt Roghman, who was the daughter of an engraver. Her uncle was also a painter, and her brother and sister were also engravers as well. So they were really an artistic family. And she made some reproductive engravings, meaning that she copied some of the drawings of her brother that were then sold as independent objects. But she also produced this 5 etching series called Household Tasks. And they seem to just be, they're very straightforward depictions of women at work. And they really sort of avoid any kind of messaging specifically about how to be good women beyond the fact that they're working. Of course, they are working and doing housework, but it seems, I mean, anthropological is a strong word, but reportorial almost. And she kind of blossoms over the course of the series. This is one of the more enigmatic ones. It shows a woman who is sitting at a table with a clock behind her. Clocks were often symbols of the possibility of death, or the inevitability of death, I should say. She also has some books in front of her. Those often too suggested sort of the pointlessness of worldly knowledge. And so some people have interpreted this as her possibly reading, but it doesn't make sense as reading. She seems to be holding and looking at a oh, and then there's also this skull down here. That's another big sign of possible of inevitable death within life. She just seems to be looking at this empty piece of cloth. It's a little bit unclear what's going on there. This one is a pancake baker. She's got a big basin full of batter here and a big scoop. And she's going to pour that onto her pan here to cook it up. And then this is a woman spinning sitting along with a female child. And um, and then finally we have a woman cleaning metalware. So there, I mean, it is very much sort of a view to this sort of women's activities. There is also the potential, I would argue, for a meta pictorial quality to the paintings, meaning that they are somewhat, I mean, paintings, engravings, they are somewhat engravings about engraving, in that the work of engraving is, as you can see from looking at closely at this image, there's all these little tiny lines that have to be painstakingly gouged out of a copper plate. And that work, sort of repetitive digging work with that is on a metal plate is suggestive of the metalware work that she's doing here. The lines on this grill, for instance, sort of relating to the lines that she's done there as well. And then even the sort of little, when you engrave, you kind of peel off these beautiful little twirls of copper, little shreds of copper that are kind of not unlike the threads of wool that she is spinning here. So I feel like there's some connection to between her work and the work that is suggested in the or depicted in the engravings. Gesina Terborch is another artist who's very much from an artistic family. Um, Her brother was so definitely a sort of more famous family than that of Gertruydt Roghman. Her brother was Gerard Terborch, who painted numerous paintings like this one. This is just sort of a little appetizer tray of paintings by Gerard Terborch. Um, he largely painted these highly naturalistic, very refined depictions of people in his milieu, in sort of the upper merchant class of Zwolle, the town that they lived in. And he also, their father was a painter who then also became a merchant as well. And he trained Gerard as a painter, and he also trained Gerard's younger brother as a painter. And Gesina also received some training as a painter from her father and from her brother, but she wouldn't have, at her social class, she wouldn't have been expected to work. And so she was left to sort of train herself to a certain extent throughout her life. She was, though, very much part of the family's artistic endeavor. You really get a sense of them, of her just sort of being the guardian in a way of her family's artistic events. Uh, One of her roles was as a model for her brother's paintings. So we can see her in several of them. Here was likely her here. and and here as well, one of these two. She also had a sister that posed as well, and so she often served as a model for her paintings. One has to wonder if she participated in planning the paintings, in arranging the composition, as well as serving as a model. She also served as an archivist for the family, preserving her father's and brother's drawings in albums. Now, Dutch artists made enormous numbers of drawings, largely for practice, sometimes to prepare for a painting, sometimes just to capture a little everyday moment that they are, you know, a beloved child. But so often these were dispersed over the centuries, and we just don't have them in one single unified place. But Gesina gathered all of these things together into her albums, and it became a really invaluable source of information about the family and her brother's career. So this is a painting by, I mean, a little drawing by her father of one of her sisters. But what's most interesting to us, obviously, in this context is that she also made artwork for herself, largely on paper and largely in albums. So just sort of pre-bound books that she would sort of work through. One of the areas of intellectual artistic endeavor that was very much open to women was calligraphy. So we can see her calligraphy here, probably copying a poem. And she also would illustrate her calligraphy as well. And so this is one of these images. All of these images, by the way, are the albums were ended up in the collection of the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, and you can see them all on their website. So one of the things that's particularly great about these paintings is that it makes you realize how actually formulaic a lot of male created standard issue Dutch painting is, in terms of their subject matter. There's just it's fairly repetitive. Even, there's all these different subgenres, but within the subgenre, you'll just have, hundreds of different examples that are very similar to each other. But here we have this, fascinating scene of a man sort of tossing a ball while there's a woman sort of standing in a certain degree of indifference to him and the back. So she creates these very fresh and surprising images. One of my favorites is this one, which is a woman carving her name on a tree. So she's out with her friends, maybe her family, in a sort of a walking party on the outside of town. She's got this beautifully sketched in view of town, a little group of people on a boat, and she has stepped away from them and tossed down her belongings, taken off her glove apparently, and pulled out a knife, and she is carving onto a tree that already has a few initials on it already. She adds the date of November 15th, 1661, a few more initials, as well as her name. And then a little motto here that says, um, in French, which was a popular language among the educated class in the Netherlands, Vive le coeur que mon coeur aime, which basically means long live the heart that my heart loves. So it's kind of girly and romantic, but she is a girl, so why not? She is a young woman. And so expressing her ideas there. But no painting like this by a man exists. And especially with this, the self-portraiture aspect there. And I love the way she's just stomping into the root of the tree with one of her delicate little shoes there to get better purchase onto the surface there. She also, in another one of her albums, she included this wonderful, very complicated image of the triumph of art of painting over death. And she depicts a painter sitting at an easel, with one foot stomping down this old man, who is Father Time, who is himself lying on a skeleton. And we have a broken hourglass here indicating the power of art to stop time. There is a phoenix, which is a bird that gets reborn, regularly reborn. And we have she's holding the tools of an artist. We've got many more on the wall behind her, canvases. And the woman is painting a depiction of the Tower of Babel, probably in a suggestion of how ancient art is. And you'll notice that she is wearing a gag, and that is actually part of the symbolism of the allegory of painting. There was a book that was published in the early part of the 17th century by this Italian Cesare Ripa that kind of provided visual recipes for depicting all sorts of different abstract concepts, whether it was like, the city of Rome, or it was the idea of, melancholy or sadness. He had some sort of little like plan of how you should represent that. And this is a version of the book that was published in Amsterdam in 1644, so that she clearly saw, that shows painting represented as a woman with her mouth gagged, because painting is mute, wearing a mask, a theatrical mask on a gold chain around her neck. So we have a similar thing happening here as well. So she is showing herself basically in this role as an allegory of painting. And then we also have a little self-portrait being carried in here by some cherubs, who really placing herself in a immortal place, as indeed she is. So I'll finish with two flower painters, including Rachel Ruysch, who some of you may have gotten to see the exhibition at the MFA. But first, Maria von Oosterwijk, that we can see there on the left. Flower painting had been a very popular, became a very popular genre in the 17th century. In part because of the age of exploration fueled a new interest in collecting as a whole, but also specifically collecting specimens of flowers from around the world. You may have heard of the famous tulip mania in the Netherlands. They were an exotic flower that had recently been imported from Turkey, and indeed people loved them. Where the market for tulip paintings had a famous collapse. The desire for flower paintings remained very strong throughout the 17th century, and they really the prices were quite good for them. And it was a particularly accessible subject matter for women to paint, because it doesn't involve painting any human figures, which were particularly difficult without the kind of technical training that you needed, that was kind of unavailable to women, because you usually needed to work from a nude model, which was deemed inappropriate for women for a very long time, well into the 19th century and even the 20th century in some places. Women were kept from working from live models. By contrast, still life subjects, while demanding, avoided that kind of complexity of the human body. So Maria von Oosterwijk was the daughter and granddaughter of Reformed ministers, but in an unusual move, her father took her to study at quite a young age with Jan Davids de Heem, a flower painter and still life artist, just sort of quite unusual that she was able to study outside of the house. But she was developed quite strongly as a painter and opened her own studio in Amsterdam, although she was not allowed to join the guild there because of their guild restrictions against women. She did sell paintings, however, to courts all over Europe, and she was celebrated as a painter for her, for one thing, for her piety. She Here we can see her depicted reading a Bible and carrying a palette, but not actually painting. She never married. Like in fact Gesina Terburg, who also never married, but she did care for an orphaned nephew, and she also taught her servant Hertjen Wijntjes how to paint. And after Oosterwijk's death, Wijntjes was able to support herself as a painter. So particularly lovely depiction of flowers in this vase with a fancy lid that has been removed to put the vases in it, kind of art being displaced by the beauty of the flowers. Our next flower painter is Rachel Ruysch. She was considerably younger than Maria van Oosterwijk. In fact, she was born on the year after Oosterwijk died. So she was the very latest of the artists that we'll look at. Her father, Friedrich Ruysch, was a anatomist and scientist, and he encouraged both Rachel and her sister Anna to train in flower painting. They studied with Willem van Alst. We can see there on the left. And so both of them learned to paint quite well, but her sister ended up stopping painting when she got married, which was also the case with Judith Leister, actually. And but Rachel continued to paint throughout her life. She married a painter who was widely considered to be a lesser painter than she was, but he was quite a father. They had 10 children together, but she continued to paint during that time. As well as Willem van Alst, Rachel Ruysch also was exposed to the art of this guy, Otto Marcius van Schriek, who was a master of this particular subgenre of painting, which was called a sotobosco, or a forest floor painting, that usually includes animal life as well as flowers. And she frequently did as well. And as we can see in this painting from 1750 of Flowers on a Trunk, we've got a variety of different animals. Often when she does include animals, there's some sort of drama going on between them. There's one's about to eat another one. Also, when just like van Schriek, when she included a butterfly in her paintings, she often made them as sort of transfer art. She would stick a butterfly wing directly on the surface of the painting and peel it back, leaving the powdery colors of the butterfly on the canvas. So kind of creating a relief print in a way of the butterfly. So sort of a quasi-scientific interest as well in doing so. And that fits with her general some of her other activities as well. She was very connected with avid collectors of plants from around the world, going beyond just, tulips from Turkey. These were plants from all over the place. And if you got to see the Museum of Fine Arts exhibition, you would have seen this map that showed where each one of these specimens comes from. So just a vast world variety of these images. And these flowers, these bouquets were entirely fictional. So typically it would be, each image would be painted from an individual preparatory drawing, and there was never a bouquet that actually looked like this that she was painting from. Rachel Ruysch was also a painted as the served as the sorry, the court painter for a king, a duke in Germany. Or excuse me, a prince in Germany. She never went to his court, but she sent him paintings regularly. This is one of them. And this reproduction just really does not do justice to this painting. It's you can see from these two works, one of the sort of earmarks of her work is this incredible profusion that she creates in her images. They're just so overwhelming, and you're pulled really close to them to look at all of the different things that are happening. And I think to some degree this compositional quality is influenced by her the some of the work of her father. As I said, he was an anatomist, but he also had this somewhat bizarre activity of creating these compositions, these dioramas out of anatomical specimens. So these are fetal skeletons, for instance, and all of these things are different, like, arterial constructions of the body. We've got bladders and kidneys and things like that that have been preserved and are piled up here. And the composition is strikingly similar to his daughter's work, and perhaps in a kind of collaboration between the two of them. I also think of it as sort of a response to her father's creepy compositions, that she's kind of, covering them over with flowers, or focusing on the more beautiful side of life. Um, Especially in the face of death. So, I mean, as I said, she sort of includes a lot of sort of dark imagery in her work of animals eating each other, but then we've got these gorgeous flowers that are just, spilling out of the paintings, and it just serves as a sort of metaphor for not only the beauty of life but the beauty of painting, which was something that she was lucky to continue for a really long time. She died in her late 80s. She painted into her 80s. This was painted in her 80s. It's a smaller, less ambitious painting than some of the ones that she's done before, but she signed it prominently with the date there, sort of proudly showing her age, but she's painting it in her name in that same living green color of the stems of her flowers. So she's kind of allying herself with a sort of permanent life force that she's depicting in her flowers. So that's it. Thank you very much for listening.
Oh my goodness. I've learned so much. That was incredible. Thank you so much, Natasha.
My pleasure.
Um, yeah, I don't see any questions now, so definitely feel free to take your time and coming up with some if you have any. We'll definitely have the time to go through them. Um, I guess I really loved Gesina's The Carving of the Tree. I thought that was really, really fun to see. And I think it's just so interesting to think about how long ago people were doing that and sort of declaring their love and their relationships into trees, and how long that might go on into history if that's just like been a continuous form.
Yeah.
Um, we have one from Sarah. I know sometimes women artists, painters in particular, would put their reflections in surfaces depicted in the paintings, sometimes as a claim of artistic agency as a signature. Was this practice well known slash common at the time, or was it frowned upon? Are there similar practices and more illustrative works?
Yes, definitely. So one of the artists that I did not talk about today, because she is Flemish and not Dutch, which I admit is probably a minor differentiation here, is Clara Peters. And she was a still life painter. We don't know how she came to get her father was not an artist, I guess, being my main point. And she could just pack in references to her name. She would put cookies that had her initials on them, and she would paint little tiny portraits inside them. And male painters did this as well, and people loved it. There was no um, frowning upon it at all. Um, there as well. Maria von Oosterwijk also did some still lifes, and I'm not entirely sure if she did not include. I don't know if she included her um, image in them at all.
Right. Carmen asks, can you explain again the concept of La Pittura and the gag worn?
Yeah. Okay. So the idea was of RIPAs was to give tools to artists to express complex ideas. And so he came up with all of these different little shorthand, sort of visual shorthands um, for people to express the different ideas. And in this case, he's taking this woman is representing the concept of painting, which in Italian is pittura, and so he's adding all of these different elements to illuminate this concept of painting. And I should say that allegories were frequently represented as women because the word in Italian was a feminine word. So la pittura is a feminine word. So therefore, she would be embodied by a female figure. It does look creepy. As you say that, I'm like, yeah, that's kind of gross that we have this woman who is gagged. But the point is that paintings themselves cannot speak. So therefore, she, as the embodiment of painting, cannot speak.
Mhm. Interesting. Sandra said that she's always loved the Dutch flower painting. And could you sort of explain the Dutch use of light and darkness?
Yes. Well, yes and no, because I mean, it's one of the big tools within flower painting is because you basically have a bouquet all the time, right? So that's the thing about flower painting. So how are you gonna vary that as an artist? And one of the things is the lighting. And you have some painters who do this kind of very like blue sky background. Every flower is perfectly illuminated, and it just really is, very lovely in that way. Um, both Maria von Oosterwijk and Rachel Ruysch working in the sort of later part of the century are more inclined to take an almost a more spotlit quality to their paintings. So we get, something like this iris here is quite dark in contrast, and then we've got a sort of hidden flower here, but then we've got this very bright flower in the foreground. And Rachel Ruysch sort of deals more in clumps of flowers, so we've got this big illuminated clump here, and it's darker in the background. You can kind of connect this to some of the impact of Rembrandt, who himself was very judicious in the use of spotlighting. If you can bring up in your mental image of the night watch with the sort of use of light and dark there. Um, so that is one of the things that you could say about it. Probably real flower painting experts would have more to say about it, but I'm just a day tripper.
Um, I mean, one of my questions, I thought it was interesting the symbolism of death found in clocks. Was that just because it's like a looming presence of time sort of ticking, or okay,
Exactly.
that makes sense. It's just like I never thought about it that way, but that was like that is a interesting sort of like symbol to put in there, especially if it was commonly used for that purpose. Um, Especially as clocks were more intricately made and incorporated. Um, but yeah, I think that's kind of puts us right at time. So
Okay.
thank you so much, Natasha. Um, this was incredibly informative and very thorough. I have so much to take with me today to learn more about. Um, yeah, again, this program has been recorded and will be put onto our YouTube channel if you would like to view it. The link to that will be included in our recap link, which will be sent out along with a feedback form for you to fill out regarding your experience with this event. But yeah, thank you everyone for joining tonight, and I hope
Yeah.
you have a good rest of your evening. And thank you
Yeah.
so much, Natasha.
Thank you for having me.